Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. There was a time in my life when I was tormented by some important questions. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to fully answer them, let alone satisfy others. But I had hope. I was constantly wondering how I got to the point where these questions took more effort than I would have liked. I was hoping that I would eventually get satisfactory answers before my head exploded. The four diabolical questions that tormented me were: 1. Is it possible to have a long-term, physically satisfying love relationship with someone you don't like, perhaps even disgust? 2. Does having a love relationship outside of marriage with someone you don't like necessarily mean that you don't really love and respect your spouse? 3. Can regular love affairs with someone you don't like allow you to blow off steam so that you become a better employee, lover, spouse, and parent than you would otherwise be? 4. Can you still sincerely believe, maybe even know, that you are not disrespecting someone you respect very much and still making love to his disgusting spouse? That these four questions bothered me became apparent only after my wife, Cindy, and I moved to a new neighborhood where I started a wonderful new job. When I, Mason Burns, married Cindy, the love of my life, 9 years ago, when I was 24, I could not have imagined that I would ever face any of these four questions. When I joined Malcolm West, president of the large international corporation TDX Incorporated, 3 years ago for my dream job, I would have laughed if I had been asked to answer any of these four questions. I would bet all my savings that they would never be relevant to my dream. Just a few months before the main part of this story began, I was, figuratively speaking, fat, dumb, and happy. That's when I started questioning a lot of things in my life. I met Malcolm West's wife Melody shortly after I started working for him. Malcolm hired me because I had a very wide range of skills that were important to him. Malcolm had trouble walking, so he often used a wheelchair. Due to my height and strength, I could physically help him in any situation, including even carrying him in a wheelchair a short distance or over a barrier. In addition, I had an MBA degree, and I understood his business in such a way that I was not only an assistant and bodyguard, but also could intelligently discuss and help implement many complex business plans, and I understood the TTX business almost as well as anyone else in the company, except Malcolm. Malcolm told me many times that I was indispensable to him, and I believed him as he made me the third highest paid TTX employee. When I first met Melody, I was surprised that Malcolm was married to her. There are many reasons for this. Firstly, when I wrote this story, Melody was probably 33 years old, maybe a year or two more, but about 20 years less than Malcolm. Secondly, Melody didn't seem very sophisticated, although Malcolm is one of the most sophisticated people I've ever met. Thirdly, Melody seemed to have the easiest time organizing, attending, or participating in physical activities, while Malcolm seemed to appreciate intellectual and artistic activities. Fourthly, Melody has a sharp tongue, and although Malcolm is a businessman and has a strong character, he never offends anyone. Melody has one feature that explains why Malcolm married her. She is very attractive, and she exudes a sultry aura. Although my impressions of Melody were not the most favorable the first few times we talked, my wife Cindy was not so harsh in her opinion of Melody. Anyway, since I didn't have to talk to Melody regularly at first, and Malcolm seemed to be relatively happily married, I just hid my views away and didn't let them occupy a single cell of my brain. Then the first unpleasant event happened. For some reason, Melody accompanied Malcolm and me on a business trip to Stockholm. I think there were several famous shopping areas that she wanted to explore. Melody and I were leaving a top-notch Stockholm restaurant where Melody had had too much to drink, although she wasn't really drunk. We planned to walk back to the hotel, and I would push Malcolm's wheelchair. This plan was put on hold when Melody stumbled, probably partly due to alcohol consumption, and partly because of her 10-centimeter heels on a young man on the street. If she had just apologized, we could have continued on our way. Unfortunately, Melody not only didn't apologize, but also burst into a torrent of expletives that are usually reserved for drill sergeants or prison guards. The offended young man responded in kind. Melody and a young man who spoke English well, as everyone in Sweden seems to do, were soon exchanging dirty words with each other. I noticed that Malcolm was uncomfortable and asked him if I should intervene, to which he enthusiastically replied, yes. I stood between Melody and the young man and calmly told him, "I'm sorry if we offended you. We are not used to the customs of your country, and I hope you can excuse us." This angered Melody, and she snapped, "He's a jerk, and I didn't do anything rude," and pushed me to try to approach the guy. I turned to her and said, "Please calm down, Mrs. West. Let's just walk to the hotel." "Not until that little asshole apologizes," she growled. Then she swung her purse at him, circling me around her finger, and the blow hit the target. Then he swung at her and delivered a glancing blow. Now it meant that I had to intervene physically. I grabbed the young man by the collar, lifted him off the ground, and took him 10 steps to the side, to the brick facade of the restaurant. I muttered to him, "I know she's acting like a fool, but you should never hit a woman. Now just turn around and leave. We're going south, and you're going north." "You can't tell me what to do," he growled. I put my hand on his throat and squeezed. Lowering my voice, I continued, "I don't want to hurt you, but you should already understand, since you can't move, speak, or do anything while my hand is clutching your larynx, that I'm quite capable of hurting you. Leave now. If after I let you go, in order to save your pride, you want to shout a few obscenities at me, do not hesitate. But leave, or you'll be in a lot of pain." The fact that he couldn't breathe for a while probably gave the guy confidence, because he nodded his head, yes. I let him go, and when we both walked away, I to the south and he to the north, he shouted a few obscenities at me, although not very loudly, because his voice had not yet fully returned. While I was dealing with this guy, Malcolm apparently calmed Melody down a bit, because she seemed ready to walk back to the hotel. However, at that moment, both she and I were slowly going crazy. Not only because she was initially to blame, but also because her short temper made the situation worse. She's because I just didn't take her side and hit the guy. Neither she nor I spoke much as we walked back to the hotel. After I delivered Malcolm to his and Melody's apartment, I went straight to my room, which was on the same floor. I undressed, took a shower, and put on a bathrobe when there was a sharp knock on the door. I opened it, and Melody squeezed past me into my room. In the restaurant, she was wearing a business suit with a relatively short skirt, jacket, and something like a light but elegant blouse, as well as shoes with 10-centimeter heels. Now, in my room, she took off her jacket, showing how thin her blouse was, and was wearing flat shoes. Melody, with her eyes shooting laser beams and her breath smelling like recently drunk scotch, verbally attacked me. "You're a fucking dumbass. Why did you side with that asshole instead of just beating the shit out of him? Because it seemed to me that you were not only wrong, but also aggravated the situation beyond measure. How could you get into a fight on the street in Stockholm? Why didn't you just leave? I'm not your fucking babysitter or bodyguard. How dare you talk to me like that, asshole? I'll ask Malcolm to fire you." Look, you don't want to tell Malcolm that it's you or me, because you're going to get knocked out of the rut before I do. He needs me for many reasons, but he needs a fool like you for nothing but love. The dispute broke out. During this, she pushed me a couple of times, and I moved back slightly with each push, just so she wouldn't get in my eyes. However, I didn't notice that the belt of my robe had unbuttoned from her thrusts, exposing my naked men's gear. Melody stopped her tirade, stared at my crotch, and a strange expression appeared on her face, and then she pushed me again. This time I tripped over one of my shoes, which were lying on the floor in front of the sofa in my room, and fell backwards onto the sofa. As I fell, I instinctively reached out and grabbed Melody's blouse. When my 111 kilograms fell back, I made sure that Melody's blouse was flimsy. My brain was working fast. "You're going to take a shower here, including getting your hair wet. Then you take the second robe in my room and, wearing only shoes, go back to your room. You tell Malcolm that you needed to relax. So you climbed into the hotel hot tub and relaxed so much that you left your clothes in the locker in the pool area. I'll give you an extra key to my room, and tomorrow, when Malcolm and I are at our morning meeting, you'll pick up your skirt. I'm sure Malcolm will never ask you about your blouse, but if he does, you'll just tell him that you spilled red wine on it and had to throw it away." Melody thought about it for a while, and then muttered, "This will work? Only one problem. My spine has turned to jelly, and I can't walk to the shower. Carry me." After we dried off, I gave her a second, smaller, bathrobe from my room, and she put it on in flat shoes. Then I gave her an extra key to my room, and she left without saying another word or looking at me. I had some strange dreams. The next morning I had an important meeting, and despite the fact that the emotions that were accumulating in the back of my mind were trying to break out, I was very productive, providing Malcolm with bits of information and suggestions that led to exactly the result we were aiming for. When I returned to my hotel room, Melody had already taken away the skirt and the torn blouse, and there were no traces of yesterday's debauchery. That night we had dinner with the supplier, the customer, and their wives, so I didn't have to talk to Melody. I slept well. The next morning, Malcolm, Melody, and I took a limo to Stockholm Airport first thing. It was only when we were flying back to the United States first class that guilt began to creep into my mind and finally burst out of the depths. The feeling of guilt was multifaceted. I cheated on my wife Cindy, the love of my life. Obviously, she didn't deserve it. My guilt didn't end there. Not only did I betray the love of my life, but also Malcolm, the man I respected the most in the world. If he or Cindy had found out about my betrayal, I don't think I could have borne the embarrassment and their disappointment. Besides, would I have been fired and blacklisted? I would have earned it. After several hours of self-flagellation, I decided that I had to do 3 things. 1. Become the best husband in the world for Cindy. 2. Become the best employee, protector, and friend in the world for Malcolm. 3. Never make physical contact again and put all thoughts of our night out of your head. I thought number 3 would be easy because I really couldn't stand Melody. Just before we landed, I vowed never to be alone with him again. Over the next 3 weeks, everything returned to normal as much as possible. Malcolm actually talked to me, and he said he had a conversation with Melody too about our obvious dislike for each other. I know that some aspects of her personality and behavior are causing you to have the wrong attitude, Mason, but for my sake, I ask you to be patient and understanding. I asked Melody for the same thing. I told him that I would do as he asked. I wanted to say, just keep that fool away from me, but that would be counterproductive. Everything went wrong again when I told Malcolm that I wanted to organize a party in honor of his 55th birthday. I knew I would never be able to throw a surprise party, and besides, his schedule didn't match it. So I wasn't afraid to tell him about my plans. When he said, "What a coincidence. Melody said the same thing yesterday about planning a party. I think it would be useful for your long-term relationship with her to work on this together and not against each other," he said with a wide smile. I tried to object and tell him that Melody could have done it herself, but he wouldn't hear of it. While I was at his office, he called Melody and told her that he wanted her and me to plan an event together on the occasion of his 55th birthday. From the conversation with Malcolm, it turned out that she also resisted, but eventually agreed. I'm going to be undergoing treatment all day on Saturday, and I'm going to be driven by an orderly, so why don't you visit Melody at my house? I'm sure the cook will cook a delicious lunch for you too, Malcolm beamed. Since I was supposed to meet Melody on Saturday, and I had an event on Sunday that I had to attend most of the day, Cindy took the opportunity to fly to her sister's halfway between her house and ours to spend the weekend shopping and chatting, flying out on Friday and returning on Monday morning. That was fine with me. I was grateful that one of the staff would be at Melody's house on Saturday, so we wouldn't be alone. I got to Melody's house around 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. I was puzzled when she opened the door instead of the butler or the maid. "Where are Winston and Carrie?" I asked, because I was friendly with both the butler and the maid. "On the weekend for both of them, since Malcolm won't be home most of the time," she replied grumpily. "Is Sean here to cook us lunch?" I asked, inquiring about the cook. "No, he said he was sick this morning. However, if you need something to eat, I can cook it." Damn, I thought. Melody and I started talking about the party. We were polite and patient for the first 5 minutes. Then we crossed swords on almost everything about the venue, food, guest list, date, time, jewelry, gifts, or lack thereof, about anything. In the end, Melody said, "Listen, you know perfectly well that you are uncouth, but I have taste. Just agree with what I want. I'm sorry, but I see everything exactly the opposite. You're rude and pretentious, and I know better what Malcolm would like." I snapped back. "Just because I was drunk and let you use me shouldn't make you happy, asshole," she giggled. "First of all, you used me first." This provoked another fierce dispute. In the end, she hit me in the face with her right hand, and then pulled it away to hit me again. I grabbed both of her hands with my left to prevent further slaps, then sat down and sat her on my lap. "Don't you dare use me, asshole," Melody growled. "God, I hate you. You perverted jerk," she growled. "I didn't use you. You know perfectly well that you asked for this," I giggled. "Yes, but I could still report you," she growled again. As soon as I was sure that my strength had returned, I got up, picked her up in my arms, carried her to the bed and put her on top of the blanket. Then I covered her with an extra sheet from the linen closet. I went downstairs, got dressed, wrote her a short note and put it on the kitchen table, confident that when she woke up, she would be terribly hungry. "Why don't you arrange a place, date and time, as well as gifts? I'll handle the guest list, food, and decorations." Agreed? I left the West Mansion, went to Schlotsky's for a large muffulette, and then tried to do some housework. Doing menial work helped me temporarily suppress my guilt and not ask myself why I used Melody, given my contempt for her and how guilty I felt after our first meeting. I took a nap, worked out, ordered Chinese delivery, talked on the phone with Cindy for an hour, and then sat in front of the TV and watched a meaningless comedy like Caddy's Hut to distract myself from my problems. By that time, it was already 10 p.m., but before the film moved on to the second scene, the doorbell rang. When I looked at the screen of the camera mounted on my front door, I couldn't believe it. I reluctantly opened the door. "May I come in?" Melody asked in an almost friendly tone. "Of course," I replied, moving away so she could walk past me. We sat down in the living room, and I turned off the TV. I waited for her to speak. After a whole day of rehabilitation, Malcolm always feels broken. He's fast asleep right now. Carrie is at home in case of an emergency, but he will sleep until 10 or 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. "We need to talk," she announced, which was the understatement of the year. "Yes," I sighed. "I think so." "Listen," she said seriously. "I know that you don't like me, and I don't like you. And the inexplicable attraction that seems to be arising between us is very disturbing to me. I've been thinking, maybe if we spend a night full of anger, this will cure us of what happened the last 2 times we were alone." I didn't react right away, so she continued, taking a small plastic bag out of her purse. "I even brought a couple of Malcolm's little blue pills to ease the situation. Do you think my idea will work?" Of course, her idea was actually a stupid invitation to deliberate deception, even without an excuse in the form of extenuating circumstances. Despite this, my small head got the better of my big one again. I got up, took her hand and slowly walked up the stairs with her to our guest room, not forgetting to set the alarm for 7 a.m. the next day. The next morning, the alarm clock woke us up, and I felt that one of my hands was on her chest and the other was on my testicles. We took a shower together without saying more than a few words and without using handkerchiefs, as our private parts were completely worn out. As we were eating a simple breakfast in my kitchen, Melody said, "It didn't work, did it?" "I'm afraid not," I replied, taking a spoonful of cereal. "Actually, I think it turned out just the opposite." After thinking about it and eating another piece of yogurt, Melody sincerely remarked, "You know I can't understand that. In fact, I despise you, and I'm sure you despise me. So why do we end up making love, especially when we're arguing?" I swallowed the cereal that was in my mouth and then answered, "I have spent more brain power on this than I would like, and I can only come to one conclusion. Some Neanderthal part of our brain that doesn't really invade our consciousness somehow generates animal magnetism between us. Of course, we both know that what we did last night, the other 2 times we were together, wasn't making love. I didn't get emotional satisfaction from it, but the physical satisfaction was unprecedented in my practice." Melody froze with another spoonful of yogurt halfway to her mouth. "I'm pretty damn sure I don't have a better explanation. I need to get back to Malcolm. Why don't you call me sometime today to talk about Malcolm's party and maybe something else?" I agreed, and she left at 8:30 a.m., and Malcolm had to wake up from his stupor at least until 10 o'clock. Later that day, I spoke to Melody on the phone. Since we weren't face-to-face, we had a perfectly reasonable conversation. She agreed with my comment about sharing responsibility for Malcolm's party, and then we moved on to talking on the phone. "Since our night walk didn't cure us, do you have any recommendations?" "What is it?" she asked. I sighed. I really hated myself, but I had to be realistic. I hate myself for having a recommendation, but it's true. Why don't we use disposable phones to schedule a meeting about once every 7 to 10 days at a condominium with a golf course owned by TTX, about 10 kilometers from your house and 15 kilometers from my office. There are no cameras. I always know when he is busy, as I am in charge of all TTX properties, and maid services are provided on request, but not regularly. 2 hours for a meeting? Melody asked. It sounds tempting. Why don't you buy us both disposable phones at the first opportunity, and we could meet on the 17th or 18th of this month, stopping by separately. You will enter through the north entrance, and I will enter through the south entrance, I suggested. After some delay, Melody replied, on the 17th at noon, okay? Yes. See you then, she signed off. Malcolm's party went off without a hitch, and everyone had a good time. Melody and I have made it a rule not to communicate with each other, except in cases of extreme necessity. By the time of the party, we had 3 more hookups, and we got to the point where we could control our contempt for each other. So it's unlikely that we had such quarrels as before. Shortly after the party, a very strange thing happened that made me feel a little better than usual because of my ubiquitous guilt. Malcolm successfully underwent physical rehabilitation to the point that he only moved in a wheelchair over long distances or over rough terrain, and also visited a psychologist about emotional problems that arose due to his disability. I was the only person, apart from maybe Melody, who knew about the consultant because Malcolm was very open with me. I was about to enter the conference room to meet with Malcolm when I heard him talking on the phone. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help myself because the door was ajar and he was standing with his back to me. I realized that it was a consultant from a few words he said, and then it seemed to hit me. I may have hinted at this before, but every week it becomes more and more true. My love life with Melody after our trip to Stockholm has become better than I could have dreamed of. I closed the door noiselessly, waited a few seconds, and knocked before opening it. Malcolm smiled broadly, waved me in, and then said, I have to go, Norman, but thanks again for your help and for listening to my news. After the meeting, I thought about what Malcolm had said about his love life. Amazingly, Cindy had said the same thing about our love life just a week or so before, also linking it to a trip to Stockholm. My constant guilt made me try to be the best husband for Cindy, and there was no doubt that she was truly happy. The same seemed to apply to Malcolm. It was the only thing that kept me from feeling so overwhelmed by guilt that I had a nervous breakdown, but I still didn't have the courage to give up my relationship with Melody. I used Melody on a regular basis about every 7 to 10 days for about 6 months when several important events happened and something else popped into my mind. 1. Cindy gave me the good news that she is pregnant, and the bad news that her mother has health problems that, although not life-threatening, will restrict her movements for several months. 2. Malcolm's physical rehabilitation was successful and he no longer needed a wheelchair. Besides, he seemed happy in his marriage, although, in my opinion, he was still too nice to Melody. 3. Although Melody still did not like either me or her, one day, after an unusually active session of adultery, even for us, she, figuratively speaking, detonated a bomb. Malcolm and I are talking about having 1 or more children. Despite my dislike of you, from a genetic point of view, you would be a better biological father than Malcolm. Do you think you would agree to conceive a child for me? As soon as I recovered from the shock, I said as seriously as I could, I'll think about it, and then left. Hell will freeze over before I agree to this. For I realized that, except perhaps for casual encounters or when we were so engrossed in love that we didn't realize it, Melody and I had never kissed. I don't know why my sudden realization of this detail affected my worldview, but it happened. I stared at myself for a long time and intently. I tried to answer each of the 4 questions that plagued me, and I didn't like the answers. 1. Is it possible to maintain a long-term, physically satisfying relationship with a person you hate? Unfortunately, yes. And it was damn hard to reject it or explain it, even after spending more brain effort on this question than I would like. However, it sucked your emotional energy out of you. 2. Does having a relationship outside of marriage with someone you don't like necessarily mean that you don't really love and respect your spouse? I knew I still loved Cindy with all my heart, but my relationship with Melody could only be seen as disrespectful to Cindy and our marriage, and I hated myself for it. 3. Can regular love affairs with someone you don't like allow you to blow off steam, so that you become a better employee, lover, spouse, and parent than you would otherwise be? In my case, it obviously made me a better lover for Cindy and a better employee for Malcolm, but at the cost of my self-esteem. 4. Can you still sincerely believe, maybe even know, that you are not disrespecting someone you respect very much and still making love to his disgusting spouse? Obviously, I could have done it with Malcolm, but I hated doing it more and more. Having answered these questions as best I could, I made a decision. It's time to move to the area where Cindy's parents and her siblings lived, establish our family there, get away from Melody, and start correcting my self-esteem, which has suffered greatly since I disrespected Cindy and Malcolm by using Melody. I knew Malcolm wouldn't like it, but because he was in better physical and emotional condition than when I started working for him 4 years ago, and because I had an excuse ready, given the state of Cindy's mother's health, I knew he would accept my decision without bitterness. Also, given my high salary over the past 4 years, Cindy and I wouldn't have financial problems even if I hadn't worked for many years, but it would actually be easy for me to find a new job on Malcolm's recommendation. Cindy was thrilled with my offer to move to her hometown. Malcolm was shocked, but he understood everything. I warned him a month in advance, and he gave me an overly generous severance package, as well as the names of executives he knew in Cindy's hometown, with whom I could talk about a new job. I'm going to miss love, but I'm not going to miss you or guilt, and I'm pretty sure I'll never cheat again. Considering her uncontested approach, I agreed to her proposal. Just use me again on Friday, and we'll never talk again. Cindy and I found the perfect home and neighborhood, located less than 15 kilometers from each of Cindy's parents, sister, and brother, and we really liked the area. 2 months earlier, Cindy gave birth to a little girl, which made me as happy as I've never been in my life. I was smitten from the first time I picked her up, and I was already trying to persuade Cindy to give birth again. Cindy's mom has noticeably recovered from her illness and hoped to live a long life. She and her husband were clearly going to be wonderful grandparents. In my new job, I had more time for both Cindy and our little girl, as well as exercise, and I was in the best physical shape of my life since college. My guilt for cheating on Cindy and Malcolm was slowly but surely dissipating, and I was sure that I would never cheat again. I avoided a bullet because no one ever found out that I was making love to Melody, so my relationship with Cindy was fantastic, and Malcolm's respect for me was not undermined. When the last joyful thought flashed through my mind, the post office delivered an urgent package. For me, there was a secret envelope from FedEx with a return address that I didn't recognize. When I opened the envelope, there was a picture of Melody lying in a hospital bed and holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The note attached to the letter said, "This crap last Friday did its job. Your biological son is priceless. No one will ever know. Your health." When I recovered from the shock, I groaned, "That damn fool." And then he threw the photo and the note into the paper shredder in his office. Now I had to live in constant fear, hoping that no one would ever find out. I didn't like it, but I think I deserved it. End.